The candles had melted into perfect pools of wax. 3 hours. 3 hours I sat in that wine-colored dress, watching my 10th anniversary dinner turn cold while my husband's promises evaporated like the steam rising from untouched plates. The silence in our house wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Every tick of the grandfather clock reminded me that Langston Reed, the man who once promised to never leave me waiting, had done exactly that. Again. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt hollow. Like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that mattered, leaving behind an echo of the woman I used to be. The wine bottle sat unopened between us, well, between me and his empty chair. Even the condensation dripping onto our wedding tablecloth looked embarrassed for me. This wasn't how milestone anniversaries were supposed to feel. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. My phone buzzed against the mahogany table. Another text. But not an apology, just 3 cold words, turn off phone. That's when I heard it. A sound that would haunt me for months afterward. The slow, deliberate slide of a wooden drawer opening somewhere upstairs. Then footsteps. Soft, careful footsteps in his study. My heart hammered against my ribs. Langston wasn't supposed to be home. His last message said he was handling some donor crisis across town. So who was walking around our house at midnight? I kicked off my heels and crept up the hardwood stairs, each step creaking like a warning. The study door stood slightly open, casting a thin line of blue light into the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. The room was empty. Completely empty. But his laptop screen glowed with a spreadsheet I'd never seen before. Rows and rows of numbers, account codes, and names I didn't recognize. My name should have been there. We'd built this financial foundation together, but it wasn't. Instead, scattered across his desk were documents bearing official seals. Legal papers with my signature on them. Papers I'd never signed. Papers I'd never even seen. My hands trembled as I picked up the first page. A beneficiary change form dated just 2 weeks ago. My name had been crossed out in red ink and replaced with someone else's. Someone named Maurice Caldwell. The drawer was still open, like whoever had been here left in a hurry. Inside, I found more documents. Transfer authorizations. Account closures. Property deeds. All with my forged signature, all moving our shared assets into names I'd never heard of. My vision blurred. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of building a life together, and he was systematically erasing me from it. Not through divorce lawyers or arguments, through paperwork. Through forgeries. Through lies so quiet I almost missed them. But I didn't miss them. And as I stood there in my anniversary dress, surrounded by evidence of my own erasure, something shifted inside me. The hollow feeling filled with something else. Something harder. I wasn't just a forgotten wife anymore. I was evidence. Living, breathing evidence of a crime. Would you have trusted those documents, or walked away? Comment below and let me know what you would have done. The grandfather clock chimed 12:30 as I whispered the question that would change everything. Who the hell is Maurice Caldwell? 3 days later, I was staring at an envelope that made my blood run cold. My name was written across the front in Langston's careful handwriting, but the return address was from some investment firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a single page. A beneficiary change notification. Clean, official, final. My name had been replaced with hers, Maurice Caldwell. The woman who was apparently worth more than 10 years of marriage. I should probably tell you who I am before this gets any crazier. My name is Zariah Cole, well, Zariah Reed now, though I'm starting to wonder if that'll change soon too. I'm the kind of woman who keeps her head down and her record straight. When my grandmother was dying, I was the one who managed her medications and counted every pill. When our community center needed a bookkeeper, I volunteered even though I was already working 2 jobs. My mother always said, "A steady hand wins the race." So I became steady. Reliable Zariah. The woman who remembered birthdays, paid bills early, and never caused drama. Maybe that was my first mistake. I met Langston at a union dinner 7 years ago. He was giving a speech about worker rights, and I was keeping track of the attendance sheets. He had this way of making everyone in the room feel important, like their voices mattered. When he walked over to thank me for organizing the check-in table, I felt seen for maybe the first time in my adult life. He was everything I wasn't. Smooth where I was awkward. Confident where I was careful. He knew how to work a room, how to shake hands with donors and make promises that sounded like poetry. I balanced his books and managed his calendar while he climbed higher in the labor movement. Our wedding was small but perfect. Just close family and a few union friends. He promised we'd build something beautiful together. Something that would last. But tonight, sitting in our kitchen with this betrayal letter in my hands, those promises felt like lies wrapped in expensive paper. My phone buzzed. A text from him. Late meeting with donors. Don't wait up. The same excuse. The same dismissal. Like I was just furniture in his life, something to be worked around instead of with. Have you ever trusted someone so much, only to realize later they were hiding something? Share your story in the comments. But here's what really twisted the knife. I remembered signing something a few weeks ago. Langston had rushed into the kitchen while I was making coffee, some urgent paperwork that needed my signature before his morning meeting. I trusted him completely, signed without reading. God, how stupid could I be? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every car door slamming outside made me wonder if he was coming home or leaving again. By morning, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly who Maurice Caldwell was, and what she'd taken from me. The county records office smelled like old paper and broken dreams. I'd never been inside before, but desperation makes you brave in ways you never expected. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass looked bored until I slid my ID through the slot and asked for any filings involving my name from the past year. Her expression shifted to something that might have been pity. "Honey, you sure you want to see these?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a plastic chair, staring at a stack of documents that made my head spin. Property transfers. Investment account changes. Even a quitclaim deed for our house. The house we'd bought together with my grandmother's inheritance money. Every single paper had my signature on it. Perfect, flowing signatures that looked exactly like mine. Except I'd never signed a single one. My hands started shaking as I flipped through the dates. The deed transfer was signed the day after my grandmother's funeral, when I was too broken to think straight. An investment withdrawal was dated during my final exams, when I was surviving on 3 hours of sleep and pure caffeine. He'd chosen his moments perfectly. Times when my guard was down. Times when I was too overwhelmed to ask questions. But the worst part wasn't the forgery, it was the timing. Each document was filed exactly 24 hours after some major moment in our life. Like he was celebrating my vulnerability by stealing pieces of my future. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every page, every signature, every date stamp. If he wanted to play games with paperwork, I was going to learn the rules. The clerk watched me work. "You need copies of these?" "Every single page." She nodded knowingly. "That'll be $47. Cash or card?" As I waited for the copies to print, I noticed something else. A pattern I'd almost missed. Every fraudulent document had been notarized by the same person, someone named K. Morrison. The address listed was just 3 blocks from Langston's office. Coincidence? Not likely. Walking back to my car, I felt different. Not just angry anymore, focused. Like someone had finally handed me a map in a maze I'd been wandering through blind. If you're still watching, hit that like button. It helps more people see stories like this. I drove straight to K. Morrison's address. It was a small office tucked between a nail salon and a taco shop. The sign in the window read Morrison Notary Services, quick and discreet. Discreet. Not discreet, discreet. Even their spelling was shady. Through the window, I could see a woman with silver hair typing at an ancient computer. She looked up when I knocked, and her face went white the second she saw me. She knew exactly who I was. And more importantly, she knew exactly what she'd done. I smiled and waved through the glass. Her hands fumbled for her phone, probably calling Langston to warn him. But I wasn't there to confront her. Not yet. I was there to confirm what I already suspected, that my husband's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was professional. Organized. Planned down to the last forged signature. As I walked back to my car, one question burned in my mind: how many other women had been erased by Morrison Notary Services? I'd been carrying my grandmother's old leather briefcase for 3 weeks now, stuffed with copies of every fraudulent document I could find. The weight of it reminded me that I wasn't paranoid, I was prepared. Mirielle Ochoa found me in the break room at the union office, stirring sugar into my coffee with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. She'd been watching me carefully ever since I'd started showing up early and staying late, which wasn't like me at all. "Zariah, baby, you look like you haven't slept in weeks." Mirielle had worked as a paralegal for 30 years before semi-retiring to help out at our local union office. She had silver hair that never moved and the sharpest eyes I'd ever seen. More importantly, she'd survived 2 divorces and could smell legal trouble from 3 states away. I looked around the empty break room, then pulled out my briefcase. "Mirielle, I need to show you something. But I need you to promise me this stays between us." She sat down across from me, suddenly serious. "What's going on, honey?" I spread the documents across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Property transfers, account changes, investment withdrawals. All with my forged signature, all timed perfectly to catch me at my weakest moments. Mirielle put on her reading glasses and started going through the papers, her expression getting darker with each page. When she reached the quitclaim deed, she actually gasped. "Zariah, these aren't just clerical mistakes. This is systematic. He's positioning you out of your own assets." Her words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd suspected it for weeks. "He's using process to make you disappear," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is what financial abuse looks like when it's done by someone who understands the system." I felt tears building behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. "What do I do?" Mirielle leaned forward, her voice fierce. "You don't fight a procedural thief with noise, baby. You fight with timestamps." She taught me things I never knew I needed to know. How to pull metadata from email drafts. How to save hidden versions of documents before they could be altered. How to notarize a statement without alerting anyone who might be watching. "Every document has a digital fingerprint," she explained. "Every computer leaves traces. If he's been forging your signature, the evidence is there, you just have to know where to look." We spent the next 2 hours going through my laptop, learning how to recover deleted emails and screenshot metadata. Mirielle showed me how to create secure backups of everything, stored in places Langston would never think to look. "The most important thing," she said as we packed up the documents, "is that you stay invisible while you gather evidence. Don't let him know you're onto him until you're ready to strike." As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the naive kind I'd been clinging to, but the sharp, focused kind that comes with having a plan. For the first time since finding those documents in Langston's study, I wasn't just a victim trying to understand what was happening to me. I was a woman with allies, and that changed everything. But when I pulled into our driveway, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Langston's car was there, and the lights were on in his study. He wasn't supposed to be home for another 3 hours. Had Morrison called to warn him? Did he know I'd been digging through county records? As I sat in my car, staring at our house, I realized the game had just gotten a lot more dangerous. Living a double life is exhausting. By day, I was still the same efficient administrator everyone expected, answering phones, filing reports, keeping track of meeting schedules like nothing had changed. But at night, I became someone else entirely. I'd wait until Langston left for his evening meetings, which I was starting to doubt were actually meetings. Then I'd spread my laptop and documents across our kitchen table like a detective working a cold case. Muriel had taught me to think like a forensic accountant. Every digital document has invisible information attached to it: when it was created, who created it, what computer it came from. She called it metadata, but I called it truth. I learned how to download full email headers, which showed me exactly when messages were actually sent versus when they were scheduled to send. I learned how to take screenshots that included timestamp information. I even learned how to photograph envelopes before opening them, in case the contents had been tampered with. The more I dug, the clearer the pattern became. Langston wasn't just stealing from me, he was methodical about it. Professional. Like he'd done this before. 3 weeks into my investigation, I found the smoking gun. It was 2:07 in the morning when I discovered a scanned affidavit buried in his email drafts folder. The document was dated 3 days after our anniversary, the night he'd left me waiting at that cold dinner table. According to this affidavit, I had supposedly relinquished my claim to the Reed Foundation, a non-profit we'd started together using money from my grandmother's estate. My signature was smooth and confident at the bottom of the page. But here's what made my hands shake. The metadata showed it had been generated from his office computer at 11:59 p.m. on our anniversary night. 11:59. 1 minute before midnight. 1 minute before I'd heard that drawer sliding open in his study. He hadn't been at some donor crisis. He'd been at his office, forging my signature while I sat alone in my anniversary dress, wondering why I wasn't worth a phone call. I printed the document, highlighted the digital creation timestamp in yellow marker, and added it to my growing folder. My evidence file had gotten so thick I'd had to buy a new briefcase. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed a strategy. That's when I remembered something Muriel had said: timing is everything in legal warfare. You get one chance to surprise someone who's been planning your destruction. Make it count. I started planning my own timeline. Not for revenge. Revenge was emotional and messy. This was about justice. Clean, quiet, devastating justice. I researched attorney Callan Price, the legal aid lawyer Muriel had mentioned. I prepared summaries of every forged document, organized by date and type of fraud. I created a timeline showing how each forgery coincided with moments when I was emotionally vulnerable. Most importantly, I started creating an insurance policy. I set up automatic backups of all my evidence, sent to email accounts Langston didn't know existed. If something happened to me, if I had an accident or suddenly disappeared, everything would be preserved. The woman who'd once signed documents without reading them was now documenting every digital footprint of her husband's crimes. But living this double life was taking its toll. I'd lost 15 pounds. My hands trembled when I tried to put on makeup. I jumped every time I heard a car in our driveway. One evening, as I was photographing yet another forged document, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman staring back at me looked haunted, hollow, like she was disappearing even as she fought to prove her own existence. That's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. Langston wasn't just stealing my money and property. He was stealing my sense of reality, making me question my own memories, my own signature, my own worth. This wasn't just financial fraud. This was psychological warfare. And tomorrow, I was going to start fighting back. But first, I needed to make one phone call that would change everything. As I reached for my phone to dial attorney Callan Price's number, I heard the familiar sound of Langston's key in the front door. He was home 3 hours early, and I was sitting at our kitchen table surrounded by evidence of his crimes. I swept every document into my briefcase faster than I'd ever moved in my life. By the time Langston walked into the kitchen, I was sitting at the table with just my laptop open, pretending to work on a union report. "You're up late," he said, loosening his tie. His voice was casual, but his eyes scanned the table like he was looking for something specific. "Just catching up on some work." My voice sounded normal, thank God. "How was your meeting?" "Productive." He opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer. "We might have secured funding for the new initiative." Lies rolled off his tongue so easily. I wondered how long he'd been practicing. The next morning, I called attorney Callan Price from the parking lot of a grocery store 3 towns away. I wasn't taking any chances with phone records. Callan's office was nothing like the marble and mahogany law firms you see on TV. It was tucked above a sandwich shop, with mismatched furniture and law books that looked older than I was. But when Callan shook my hand, his grip was firm and his eyes were sharp. "Tell me everything," he said, settling behind his desk with a yellow legal pad. I spread my evidence across his desk: the forged documents, the metadata printouts, photographs of signatures that weren't mine, the timeline showing how each fraud coincided with my most vulnerable moments. Callan studied everything without saying a word. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. "This isn't just fraud, Zariah. This is systematic financial abuse. The kind that takes planning and expertise." He tapped the stack of documents. "How much are we talking about in total?" "Close to $400,000. Maybe more." He let out a low whistle. "And you have proof he generated these documents from his own computer?" I nodded, pointing to the metadata reports, including the one he created on our anniversary night while I was waiting for him at home. "We don't go public yet," Callan said firmly. "First we freeze everything. We file for a temporary restraining order on all contested accounts and request a forensic audit. We also put a flag on any property transfers involving your name." Within 48 hours, legal papers were flying. The TRO was granted based on the evidence of forged signatures. Every account Langston had moved money from was frozen pending investigation. The county recorder's office was notified to flag any new documents bearing my name. I'll never forget sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot after we filed those papers. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like someone was standing on my chest. The ground had stopped sliding beneath my feet. But Callan's warning echoed in my mind: he's going to fight back hard when he realizes what's happening. Be ready for anything. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang as I was driving home. "What the hell did you do?" Langston's voice was ice-cold fury. "I protected myself," I said calmly. "Protected yourself? From what? I'm your husband. You're a thief who's been forging my signature for months." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Then, you have no idea what you've just started." The line went dead, and I realized the real war was just beginning. The Riverside Union's annual dinner was held at the same hotel where Langston and I had met 7 years earlier. Same ballroom, same gold curtains, same stage where he'd first impressed me with his speech about fighting for working families. Tonight, That stage would become the scene of his downfall. I hadn't planned to attend. The thought of watching him work the crowd with his charm while knowing what kind of man he really was made my stomach turn. But Callan convinced me it was important to be visible. "Don't hide," he'd said. "You've done nothing wrong. Let him be the one who's uncomfortable." So I bought a simple black dress and pulled my hair back in a neat bun. No jewelry, no unnecessary attention. I wasn't there to make a statement. I was there to watch justice unfold. I sat in the back with Muriel, who'd insisted on coming as my backup. The ballroom was packed with union leaders, local politicians, and the kind of wealthy donors who liked to think they cared about working people. Langston took the stage to thunderous applause. He looked confident in his expensive suit, every inch the successful labor advocate. When he started speaking about integrity in leadership, and fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, I felt bile rise in my throat. "Thank you all for your continued support of our mission," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Together, we're building a movement that puts working families first." That's when my phone buzzed. A text from someone I didn't recognize. "Check your email now." I opened my email and saw a message from a local reporter. The subject line made my heart race: "Union executive under investigation for financial fraud." The article had just gone live. Everything was there: the forged documents, the frozen accounts, the forensic audit. The reporter had done their homework, pulling details from the public court filings Callan had submitted. I looked up at the stage where Langston was still speaking, completely unaware that his world was crashing down around him. Then I saw him pull out his phone, probably feeling it buzz with notifications. His face went white as he read whatever was on his screen. He stumbled over his next words, losing his place in the speech he'd probably given 100 times before. The murmur started in the front rows and spread backward like wildfire. People were checking their phones, whispering to each other, pointing toward the stage. Langston tried to recover, but his smooth confidence was cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His voice wavered as he attempted to continue his remarks about trust and accountability. Then it happened. He looked out across the crowd and his eyes found mine. For just a moment, panic flickered across his face. The same panic I'd felt when I discovered his betrayal, now reflected back at him. I didn't stand up. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the talking for me. The applause when he finished was polite but scattered. People were too busy reading the news article to pay attention to his closing remarks. As he walked off the stage, I saw him pull out his phone again. This time, I knew exactly who he was calling. His attorney. Langston didn't come home that night. Or the next night. By the third day, I started to wonder if he'd fled the state entirely. When he finally showed up, it was with his lawyer in tow, a sharp-dressed woman who looked like she charged more per hour than I made in a month. "Zariah, we need to talk," he said, standing in our living room like a stranger. His lawyer stepped forward. "Mrs. Reed, my client wants to resolve this matter quickly and quietly. There seems to have been some misunderstanding about certain financial documents." Misunderstanding? I almost laughed. "You mean the documents he forged with my signature?" Langston's mask slipped for just a second. "Those were clerical errors, Zariah. Staff mistakes. You know how busy my office gets. Staff mistakes that happened to benefit your girlfriend?" The lawyer shot him a warning look. "Mrs. Reed, emotional accusations aren't helpful here. Neither is systematic fraud, but here we are." For the next hour, they tried every trick in the book. Gaslighting. Minimization. Blame shifting. Langston painted himself as the victim of overzealous employees and unfortunate coincidences. "Why are you doing this?" he asked when his lawyer stepped out to take a call. "We can fix this. We can start over." Start over. I stared at him. You stole $400,000 from me. You forged my signature on legal documents. You replaced me as beneficiary with another woman. What exactly would we be starting over with? I never meant for it to go this far. Which part? The stealing or the lying? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing. Now it just looked pathetic. Maris isn't what you think. She helps with certain business arrangements. Business arrangements that required erasing me from our financial accounts? His lawyer returned before he could answer. We're prepared to make an offer. She slid a folder across our coffee table. Inside was a settlement proposal that made my head spin. Full restoration of all accounts. Removal of all fraudulent filings. A public statement attributing the errors to administrative oversights by unnamed staff members. No admission of guilt. No criminal charges. Just everything quietly returned to the way it was before. This is generous, the lawyer said. More generous than you'll get in court. I looked at the papers, then at Langston. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I need to discuss this with my attorney, I said. After they left, I called Callan immediately. Take it, he said without hesitation. You've already won, Zariah. You proved the truth. Don't let pride blind you to a complete victory. But he gets away with it. Does he? His reputation is destroyed. His career is over. The union board will never trust him again. And everyone knows exactly what kind of man he is. That night, I sat in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd discovered his betrayal, where I'd taught myself to be a detective, where I'd planned my quiet revolution. Justice doesn't always look like handcuffs and courtrooms. Sometimes it looks like restoration. Sometimes it looks like truth finally coming to light. I signed the settlement agreement with my own pen, my real signature, witnessed by people I trusted. For the first time in months, I was signing something I'd actually read. Moving day was surprisingly peaceful. I'd expected drama, tears, maybe even one last attempt at manipulation. Instead, Langston stayed locked in his study while I packed my life into boxes. I didn't take much. Clothes, books, my grandmother's jewelry, and a few pieces of furniture that had belonged to my family. Everything else felt contaminated by his lies. The hardest part was packing up the photos from our wedding. 7 years ago, I'd thought I was marrying my best friend. Looking at those pictures now, I wondered if I'd ever really known him at all. Callan had advised me to take the settlement. You've proven your point, he'd said. Don't let pride keep you trapped in a legal battle that could drag on for years. He was right. The frozen accounts were restored within a week. The forged documents were officially voided. The property transfers were reversed. On paper, it was like his betrayal had never happened. But some things can't be undone with legal documents. The trust was gone forever. The version of myself that signed papers without reading them, that believed in promises without proof, she was gone too. Maybe that was for the best. My new apartment was tiny, just a one-bedroom space above Schmidt's Bakery on Maple Street. But every morning I woke up to the smell of fresh bread, and for the first time in years, that felt like hope. I used part of the settlement money to start something Langston could never take away from me. The Grace Cole Legal Fund, named after my grandmother, provided free consultations for people facing financial abuse. Muriel helped me set it up, and within a month we were helping 3 other women who'd found themselves in situations eerily similar to mine. You'd be surprised how common this is, Muriel told me as we reviewed applications. Abusers who use paperwork as weapons. They count on their victims not understanding the system. But I understood it now. I understood that signatures have power, that documents have fingerprints, that the truth leaves traces even when people try to erase it. I also started telling my story. First anonymously on a blog, then under my own name. Not for revenge, I was done with anger. But for warning. For the woman somewhere who might be signing papers she doesn't understand. For the wife who's been replaced as beneficiary and doesn't even know it yet. The responses were overwhelming. Hundreds of women sharing similar stories. Some had fought back like I did. Others were still trapped, still gathering evidence, still finding their courage. Your story gave me the strength to check my own documents, one woman wrote. I found irregularities I never would have noticed. Thank you for teaching me to trust my instincts. That's when I knew the real victory wasn't in the settlement money or the restored accounts. It was in the women who would never be erased because they'd learned to watch for the signs. As I sat in my small apartment, editing another blog post about recognizing financial abuse, I heard that sound again. The soft scrape of a drawer sliding open. But this time, it was my drawer. My documents. My truth, carefully organized and protected. The sound that once signaled my erasure now reminded me of something else entirely. I was the evidence. I was the proof. I was the woman who refused to disappear. The Riverside Union's annual dinner was held at the same hotel where Langston and I had met 7 years earlier. Same ballroom, same gold curtains, same stage where he'd first impressed me with his speech about fighting for working families. Tonight, that stage would become the scene of his downfall. I hadn't planned to attend. The thought of watching him work the crowd with his charm while knowing what kind of man he really was made my stomach turn. But Callan convinced me it was important to be visible. Don't hide, he'd said. You've done nothing wrong. Let him be the one who's uncomfortable. So I bought a simple black dress and pulled my hair back in a neat bun. No jewelry, no unnecessary attention. I wasn't there to make a statement. I was there to watch justice unfold. I sat in the back with Muriel, who'd insisted on coming as my backup. The ballroom was packed with union leaders, local politicians, and the kind of wealthy donors who liked to think they cared about working people. Langston took the stage to thunderous applause. He looked confident in his expensive suit, every inch the successful labor advocate. When he started speaking about integrity in leadership, and fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, I felt bile rise in my throat. Thank you all for your continued support of our mission, he said, his voice carrying across the room. Together, we're building a movement that puts working families first. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from someone I didn't recognize. Check your email. Now. I opened my email and saw a message from a local reporter. The subject line made my heart race. Union executive under investigation for financial fraud. The article had just gone live. Everything was there. The forged documents, the frozen accounts, the forensic audit. The reporter had done their homework, pulling details from the public court filings Callan had submitted. I looked up at the stage where Langston was still speaking, completely unaware that his world was crashing down around him. Then I saw him pull out his phone, probably feeling it buzz with notifications. His face went white as he read whatever was on his screen. He stumbled over his next words, losing his place in the speech he'd probably given 100 times before. The murmur started in the front rows and spread backward like wildfire. People were checking their phones, whispering to each other, pointing toward the stage. Langston tried to recover, but his smooth confidence was cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His voice wavered as he attempted to continue his remarks about trust and accountability. Then it happened. He looked out across the crowd and his eyes found mine. For just a moment, panic flickered across his face. The same panic I'd felt when I discovered his betrayal, now reflected back at him. I didn't stand up. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the talking for me. The applause when he finished was polite but scattered. People were too busy reading the news article to pay attention to his closing remarks. As he walked off the stage, I saw him pull out his phone again. This time, I knew exactly who he was calling. His attorney.